Disaffected. I'm Joshua Slocum, and this is the show where we talk about politics, culture, and relationships through a psychological lens. We've got lots for you this week. We are going to talk about how women and black people who cosplay at a Charles Dickens Christmas fair are super oppressed. Then we're going to look at how gender ideology, queer ideology, trans ideology is now forcing even more U.S. public high school girls to change and get naked in locker rooms in front of boys. And our other big one is going to be the new fake illness, post-pandemic stress disorder, which doesn't exist, and how it's causing all of these unusual heart attacks in young people, and it's totally not the vaccine. But first, late breaking news, justice for Jussie. Thank you, Dave Chappelle. Thank you for giving us Jussie Smolett. So, if you haven't heard, Jussie Smolett, the B-list actor from some show called Empire, was convicted of 5 counts of disorderly conduct for faking a hate crime 2 years ago that had the attention of the nation all on him. And how did the mainstream media react to this? Just as you would expect, because when he made these claims originally in 2019, they believed every single word, and anybody who was skeptical about it was instantly called a homophobe and a racist. They do not like that we were right. So check out this headline. Now, this is an opinion piece. It's not straight news. They are allowed to have opinion. I want to make that clear. But this opinion piece from MSNBC is titled, Jussie Smolett being found guilty of hoax will hurt LGBTQ folks reporting hate crimes. Did you catch that? It's not that the fact that he hoaxed America into believing a hate crime happened. It's not that that's going to hurt LGBTQ folks. It's his being found guilty that is going to hurt us. That's important. I saw another headline. I couldn't find it again to clip for you, but I saw another headline that said, the Jussie Smollett verdict will hurt blah, 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 blah. No, I'm not giving them the benefit of the doubt. I don't think they meant it in the reasonable way. I think they mean it exactly the way they wrote it. And there's a couple of clips from this article, a couple of quotes that I pulled for you. One of them says, with this guilty verdict, it's really those people who... Oh, and I'm having a hard time because I didn't reproduce it on my paper here. Let me see if I can read this. With this guilty verdict, it's really those people who lost, not just Smollett, with the winners being people who are now more emboldened in demanding even more from victims before receiving justice. Sure, Smollett may have lied, or at least he was found guilty of it. But statistically, most people who report these cases do not lie and are rarely ever believed. You see it, right? Sure, he may have lied, I guess. I guess he was convicted of it or something. Unbelievable. What did he claim? He claimed that in the middle of a Chicago winter, when it was negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit outside, at 2 in the morning, I was going to say he had the fever for the flavor of a Pringles, but I don't think they sell Pringles at Subway. I think it's just those nasty Sun chips. Anyway, he's going to go off to Subway at 2 in the morning, and 2 dudes come out of the shadows and put a noose around his neck, throw bleach all up on him, and say, hey, boy, this is MAGA country. Ain't you that faggot from Empire? Really? But what really happened? Well, what we found in the court trial was that he had hired these 2 gentlemen from Nigeria to participate in this hoax, and guess what? Just a few days beforehand, he was masturbating with one of them at a gay bathhouse. So here's what I want to know. Was it also MAGA country during the reach around the day before? Or was it only MAGA country during the fake thing that didn't happen the next day? This is MAGA country. You know what else I think? Some of you are not going to like this. But I've been a gay man for a very long time, and I have seen almost everything there is to see about how we gay men operate, how our minds work, and what we look for. This story looks more to me like somebody's bondage and discipline fantasy. Yes, I mean it. Yes, I think it's that gross. What can I tell you? Let's move along. That's enough justice for Jussie. So, staying with the theme of horrible racial oppression, which is worse in 2021 for Black people than it's ever been for any people on the face of the earth, we moved to San Francisco and the San Francisco Chronicle, which has a feature-length story on everything that's wrong with a Charles Dickens Christmas fair. So let me give you the synopsis of this story. Is that every year there's a fair that runs for 3 weeks in San Francisco. And the theme is a Victorian Christmas, a Charles Dickens Christmas. So people dress up, they interact with people. It seems like it's something between interpreting history and a Ren fair, right? In fact, I think this festival grew out of a Renaissance fair in the 60s. So a bunch of these people volunteering are now all claiming that they are unsafe in their volunteer costume roles and that the theater production company that puts this on has not made them safe. And now they're boycotting the company that does this every year called Red Barn Productions until or unless Red Barn meets a long list of demands. So let's set the scene. Quote, for her first Great Dickens Christmas fair in 2015, LaToya Tools fashioned a gown out of dollar store hula hoops and a tablecloth. A friend invited her to the annual event, a festive recreation of 19th century London inspired by the works of Charles Dickens, that has been running in San Francisco for nearly 40 years. Almost as soon as she arrived at the antique winter wonderland, she joined the revelers on Fezziwig's dance floor and didn't stop waltzing for hours. Fezziwig? So here's a quote from Tools. I met some of my greatest friends at the Dickens Fair, said Tools, who went on to join the event's volunteer cast, taking on bigger roles and more responsibility every year. What started as a goodwill effort to help rectify what is seen as the event's failure to protect its volunteers and guests from racist and sexist behavior has turned ugly. Now, more than 200 cast members and thousands of guests have pledged to boycott this year's fair, which is set to return to the Cow Palace on Saturday, December 4th, in a scaled-down drive-through experience for the next 3 weekends. So, what has got all these hundreds of people exercised? Here is a summary of their complaints. Quote, sorry, I'll explain this acronym to you later, just bear with me. Every member of a load has been called a slave, said Anastasia Elizondo, an Afro-Chicana actor, that was Dis Latina, and comedian from Oakland who has been performing at the Dickens Fair for nearly 20 years. She adds that fairgoers' limited knowledge of Black history can lead to offensive generalizations and assumptions. Quote, one of us has been called Aunt Jemima and another one Sally Hemings, end quote. Okay, first, I don't believe her. Not every member of your cast was called a slave. That didn't happen. You're making it up. Next. Why is it... Okay. I do believe there are people who work in interpreting living history museums like Plymouth Plantation in Massachusetts or George Washington's Mount Vernon or some of Thomas Jefferson's properties. And it's obvious. I mean, it's uncontroversial. People come in from all walks of life with varying levels of knowledge, and a lot of people are going to ask questions that might seem offensive or ignorant. That's what living history is supposed to help people learn about. So I know that there are people who've worked in these costumed roles who've had offensive things said to them or ignorant things said to them. That's not hard to believe. I don't believe every single one of them has been called a slave. And I have to ask this, and I know these people they're not working for a museum, it's a festival, but it is somewhere in the same neighborhood. Why is it the Red Barn production company's responsibility to, quote, protect you from people saying these things? Why? Why is that a reasonable demand? You know what you should do? Reply in character. Pretend you don't understand. Good Lord, what an ignorant thing to say. I couldn't possibly. You brush it off or you give it back to them in character and you keep the show going. You ignore them and move along. I mean, come on. None of these people could be a comedian. Can you imagine them dealing with hecklers? I felt unsafe because somebody didn't laugh at my joke. More complaints. Angel Dots, who is biracial and calls herself a Dickens fair brat, started attending with her parents when she was a toddler. She says she's used to being one of the few brown faces at the fair, but when her husband, a black man, started attending, she began to understand what the situation was like for other attendees of color. Despite having a cast member pass, she says he was stopped at every security gate, not just by hired security officers, but also by fellow fair participants, and looked at with suspicion by vendors. That's a lie. Angel is lying. You are going to tell me that in one of the most multicultural, multi-ethnic cities in the world, San Francisco, that fairgoers on the street and security guards at this Dickens fair stopped him because he was black, because it was so unusual to see a black person walking anywhere? You are lying. You're lying. It's just not believable. Here we have complaints from Bianca Hernandez-Knight, who recently resigned from all of her roles at the Society's national board after months of back and forth with the group's leadership over a proposed and ultimately rejected diversity statement. Quote, "This all relates to a bigger conversation around how people view history," she said. "The issues we are facing in historical costuming spaces and the backlash to critical race theory, I genuinely think those things are very similar. There are people who just really need their history to be as whitewashed and comfortable for them as possible." Yeah, that's it. More. In 2019, more than 15 people sent letters to Red Barn describing their experiences with sexual assault or harassment, resulting in the dismissal of a serial offender. But the stories stayed locked away inside the Fair family, with no human resources professional on staff or a formalized process for reporting abuse. Well, that has changed. By the way, I have no trouble believing that there was a creep in the theater company who was doing that. I've known theater people my whole life. I've seen this kind of people. Absolutely no trouble believing that. What I do have trouble believing is that it's endemic, that it's everybody, that it's happening all the time. Nope, don't believe it. More from the article. Red Barn, this is the theater production company they're boycotting. Red Barn CEO Kevin Patterson says that affirmative consent training was implemented in 2016, but admits it was not enough. But he also believes the scope of the problem has been overblown. Social media has made one complaint sound like 1,000 complaints and one circumstance sound like the norm, which is the outlier. Yeah, that sounds about right to me. And we'll give you one more from one of the primary complainants here. I'll read to you first, and then I'll introduce her to you on screen. For Ari Yovel, who is autistic and transgender, the current conflict Load members are facing parallels their own struggle to advocate for marginalized communities within the fair. For years, Yovel advocated as a representative of the Order of the Golden Needle, a neurodivergent advocacy group for a destimulation space within the fair, or a destim room. Quote, "Each time I was met with the sentiment that even though they took my requests very seriously, they just couldn't possibly do anything about them. All the while, I was being paraded out as a poster child for how progressive and cooperative Red Barn were." Yovel is boycotting this year's fair and is unsure if they will ever return. Let's look at they. Do we have they, Kevin? Here's Ari Yovel, a bearded lady. Yeah, you're looking at another young woman on testosterone. Let's look at her Twitter bio, how she presents herself to the world. Ari Yovel, nice Jewish queer. They, them, L, and a bunch of symbols. Yet another trans mask, NB neurodivergent rabbinical student named Ari. Yeah, I know, you fucks are a dime a dozen. Good Lord. I'm going to close up here, but two things I want to say. First, where is... This pressure group, Londoners of the African Diaspora, or LOAD. LOAD in San Francisco. Let's take a look at a portrait of LOAD. Do we have these lovely ladies? Yes, here they are. Look at them. Look at the expressions on their face. Belligerent. You know what this is? I don't remember what episode I said this on. This is sullen, aggrieved, borderline facial expression. Especially that chick in the center down there with that smug, belligerent, yet disappointed, challenging look on her freaking mug. These people are just wound collectors. They're professional career grievance mongers. That's all they are. We got to take a break. Let's come back and talk more on the other side.
For more conversation on the dark and disordered psychology that shapes today's cultural and political left, subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Google Podcasts, and virtually anywhere else you get your podcasts. Let's learn to recognize these dynamics and call them what they are. Subscribe to Disaffected to learn how to break the spell.
We now have a bonus for our supporters. You can help the Disaffected podcast grow and receive invitations for our off-air Zoom hangouts by becoming a supporting member on Patreon or SubscribeStar. Patreon users, go to patreon.com/disaffected. SubscribeStar users, you can find us at subscribestar.com/disaffected. Check out our webpage at disaffected.fm for the complete list of ways you can help support us, and thank you.
Welcome back. Would you like to give Disaffected money? Sure, we all would. Wouldn't you? We would love to have your support. If you like the show, and I think you get content here with a twist that you're not going to get anywhere else, we'd really appreciate your support. There's a couple of easy ways to do it. Go to patreon.com/disaffected, or if you don't use Patreon, go to subscribestar.com/disaffected. You can sign up at whatever level you want. And one of the perks you get for being a supporting member is we have monthly Zoom meetings that are private, unscripted, off-air, not recorded. You get to talk to other people who watch the show. I'm there. Whatever you want to do is what we talk about. And our most recent that occurred today was our screening of Mommy Dearest. So we do have some fun. And if you want to have some fun, join the Insiders Club. I also want to say for people who may be watching this show for the first time, and folks, I'm going to do this throughout this show. Many of you are loyal viewers and listeners. Thank you very much. I see the same faces every week. It's delightful to see you. You interact with me on Twitter. I appreciate your loyalty. But new people come into the show. And if you are new to the show, you're going to hear me talk about a couple of terms. One of them is cluster B. These are cluster B personality disorders: narcissism, borderline, histrionic, and antisocial. Antisocial is what you know as psychopathy or sociopathy. These personality disorders are really at the heart of the thesis of this show, which is that this is the kind of psychology, it's the kind of broken moral psychology that is responsible for domestic abuse and child abuse, but it is increasingly responsible for the political polarization that we're seeing in this country. And if you'd like to get a firmer handle on what this means and how I've made that connection, whether you buy my argument or not, a couple of back episodes I recommend to you. Please start with episode 1 called Mommy Issues. That's the origin story of the show. Episode 2 is called Don't Diagnose. And it's about the complaint that people like me get, talking about how we shouldn't be noticing or diagnosing personality and character disorders in people. So those two will give you a sort of foundation to understand why I talk about that. Now let's get into queer and gender ideology. We've talked before about how schools around the country are deciding that so-called gender identity is more important than biological sex. And so, schools are virtue signaling all over the place by taking away the private space of their female students. I saw a story earlier this week from a Chicago school district that has proudly renamed all of its bathrooms. It doesn't say boys and girls anymore. It says any gender. They're very, very proud of this. This isn't gender inclusive. The correct term for this is mixed sex bathrooms and mixed sex locker rooms. Don't let this language fool you. Don't let it make you seem like something that you always knew was an invasion of privacy is suddenly warm and cuddly. It's not. It's mixed sex. It means boys can come in too. It means girls, especially adolescent girls, having their period, they get to be watched by boys. That's just their new lot in life. This one is also near Chicago, what we're going to talk about here. We'll put up on the screen the tweet that caught my eye. And the user Jonathan Van Maren said, take a minute and watch this. A teenage girl fighting tears because her school board ruled that bathrooms are open to anyone who identifies as a girl. She is terrified that a boy will see her naked. Her privacy concerns are dismissed. She is collateral damage for trans activists. She is. And you're going to see a contrast between one such young trans activist and what this young woman has to say. Let's roll that video.
Yeah, it passed. It passed. I'm really hoping they vote for it. It's definitely going to be a step forward in progress. I'm really excited if they vote for it. A bit nervous though, as always. Just you never know. But it's definitely a first step forward in many more steps. It's a great policy. Unfortunately, it's not everything we want, such as talking about even the small things like changing the name on your student ID, which you're required to wear at all times. So I'm really hoping that the district makes the right decision here and votes it. Yeah, it passed. It passed.
And how does that make you feel?
Oh, I'm ecstatic.
I'm sorry.
I feel uncomfortable that my privacy is being invaded. As I am a swimmer, I do change multiple times naked in front of the other students in the locker room. And I understand that the board has an obligation to all students, but I was hoping that they would go about this in a different way that would also accommodate students such as myself.
So, for those of you who are listening and could not see, the first young person speaking was a young male student. I'm going to have to describe this the way I see it. I just want to tell you I am not intending to be cruel. I'm not intending to be funny. I mean what I say, but I don't mean it to be unnecessarily insulting. However, here's what's going on. That young man is an awkward, unattractive young man. Dumpy, sloppy, with long, lanky, greasy, bright pink dyed hair. This is a young man who, because he's in an awkward stage and he's making himself deliberately ugly on top of it, he is going to have a hard time finding a date or being popular. I'm not saying that's great, but it is the reality of teen adolescence. He's not the popular kid, but he's glorying in this. This is his ugly duckling moment. Again, I know, I don't mean to be cruel to adolescents, but that's what's going on here. He is glorying in the fact that he just got the entire school district to dance to his tune. He just got to walk into every single female space in that school district, regardless of how the girls feel. He won, and he loves it. And look at the contrast with that young woman, his classmate. If you can't see it, if you're watching, you'll notice that she's fighting back tears. Listen to how carefully she modulates her voice, how calm she remains, because she knows Even though she's right here, she's the one who's being taken advantage of. She knows that she can't signal that she's emotionally upset by it because she'll be called a bitch. She'll be called a bigot. You are watching the target of abuse have to pretend she's not the one who's abused, because if she signals to you that she knows it's abuse, she'll get more abuse. I'm sorry, this makes me so angry. It makes me so angry. I've been in her position in other contexts. Many of you have been. This is presented by the news as a wonderful, happy story, and people can't see exactly what's right in front of them. Why are they doing that to this girl? Why are they doing it to all the girls here? What is wrong with you, Palatine High School? What's wrong with you? All I can say is let the lawsuits come. Let them come as quickly as possible, please. This needs to be a national scandal that rocks the public school foundation to its core. And frankly, at this point, I hope it helps destroy the Department of Education in this country. I want it gone. The next one is even, well, in its own way, I think even more disturbing. One of the things that constitutionally narcissistic and abusive people do is take what is not theirs, go into rooms that do not belong to them, pick locks physically and metaphorically, insinuate themselves into spaces where they're not welcome, and they do it behind a mask. This past week, there was a memorial service for 14 women who were killed in Montreal in 1989. You may have heard of this. It's called, well, some people call it the Montreal Massacre. It was when 14 women were killed by a deranged man with a gun at the École Polytechnique in the province of Quebec. Wikipedia gives a good synopsis. Quote, on December 6, 1989, Marc Lepine entered a mechanical engineering class at the École Polytechnique and ordered the women and men to opposite sides of the classroom. He separated 9 women, instructing the men to leave. He stated that he was, quote, fighting feminism, and opened fire. He shot all 9 women in the room, killing 6. The shooter then moved through the corridors, the cafeteria, and another classroom, targeting women for just under 20 minutes. He killed a further 8 before turning the gun on himself. So he killed 14 women and then himself. Notice, this is about killing women. This is actual misogyny, isn't it? I mean, this is murderous misogyny. He let the men leave the room. So the core of this story, my friends, is about a man's hatred, murderous hatred for women, and how bad misogyny can get if it goes unchecked. Well, they had a memorial service last week, and guess who they... Let me just read to you from the CBC, the Canadian Broadcast Corporation. Quote, a transgender woman in Prince Edward Island has been invited to speak at a Montreal Massacre memorial service being held today by the Prince Edward Island Advisory Council on the status of women. Monday marks 32 years since 14 women were killed at École Polytechnique. Yeah, and the part you forgot, CBC? Well, you didn't forget. You used the passive voice. A man killed them. They were killed. By what? By a murderous, misogynist man. You're welcome. Quote, I was deeply touched, said Anastasia Preston. It's a huge honor for myself. And it's a huge honor as a trans woman to be included in an event like this. I wanted to read it this way. I was deeply touched. It's a huge honor for myself and a huge honor for a trans woman to be included in an event like this. For decades, trans women have been kept out of the conversation around gender-based violence. I wonder why. Government data does not have accurate records of the number of transgender women murdered in gender-based violence, Preston said. Okay, stop it. Stop it. It's not gender-based violence. It's violence against women. This is this is male violence against women. Gender-based. And the government doesn't have accurate records of the number of transgender women murdered in gender-based violence, blah, 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 blah. You know what? Because it's almost nil. You look at a country like the United States, Canada, the UK, the chances of being killed as a transgender woman, which is a man in a dress, a man in drag, that's what that is so low that the chances of that transgender woman, again a man in drag, being the murderer are higher than being the murder victim. And those transgender women who do get killed, nearly all of them are killed because they're hookers. They're street prostitutes. They're working in one of the most dangerous trades known to humanity. Countless women get raped, killed, exploited, and trafficked, and it happens to men who work in sex as well. That's why. Because their Johns are killing them. Their pimps are killing them. Not because they're transgender, because they're whores. And sadly, the life of a whore is a violent life. Anastasia Preston continues. It boils down to the trans community's relationship with the government and police, she said. A lot of it comes down to the way the government collects information and also, to a certain extent, community reluctance to engage with the government due to decades of systemic oppression. Blah, 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 blah. It's like a goddamn chatty Cathy doll. There are 4 pre-programmed responses and he just pulls his own string out of his back and blithers. During Monday's event, this is the memorial for these massacred women, Preston said she will speak about some of her experiences of harassment on Prince Edward Island, and she hopes her story can raise awareness. One incident happened in a bar. Take a look at this. I had a red dress on, and I was walking through the crowd, and somebody groped me. It was probably one of the most revolting experiences I've ever had in my life, she said. I couldn't believe that somebody would just touch me like that. They felt they had the right to my body when they didn't. So because this bloke got groped in a bar, he needs to be the man to speak at a memorial for 14 women who were killed by an unrepentant misogynist who was targeting feminists? Are you fucking kidding me? Who made this decision? Let's take a look at Anastasia. Take a good, hard look. Hard being one of the operative terms. If you can't see this, it's hard for me to explain. This is a portrait that he chose of himself. This is his portrait on Twitter and his social media. It's one of those affected, 1960s author photos with the hand curled under the chin and the chin resting on the hands, looking thoughtful and a little bit saucy. Look at that face. That is not a smile. That is a smirk. That is the look of a predator. That is the look of a narcissist or a sociopath or a narcissistic sociopath or any cluster B. It's also known as duper's delight. That is a smile, a smirk, that tells you, I know that you know, and I know that even as you sit there knowing that you can't say anything, because if you do, I'm going to win. That's what that look is saying. That is a predator. That is a snake. That is a wolf. It's a cluster B look. You see it often in so-called trans women. Why? Because the kind of man who goes to the trouble of trying to make everyone around him pretend that he's a woman and does things like fakes having a period and tries to get onto a stage at a memorial service for women who were killed before he was born as a man, because that kind of person is cluster B, my friends and listeners. That is narcissism. That's not a normal range personality. This is what I mean when I say this kind of transgenderism is not, I mean, yeah, it's a mental sickness, but it's not a standalone mental sickness. It's a symptom. It's a symptom of cluster B. That's where it comes from. And notice the Disney villainess aesthetic. The narrow eyes. The harsh makeup. The unnatural look. The sharp, cold hardness. It looks like a Disney villainess, does it not? You see this a lot, too, with these alleged trans women. Compare Anastasia's picture to, say, Lady Tremaine, the stepmother from Cinderella. That is the look of a narcissist and a predator. Or compare to the Wicked Queen in Snow White. You see the aesthetic. You see the theme I'm talking about. I want to go a little farther, a little closer to home. Take a look at Ursula from The Little Mermaid. The leer, the excessively arched eyebrows, the hard, unnatural makeup. You know who Ursula was modeled on? Divine, the drag queen Divine. You see how these things are connected, right? You see where this aesthetic comes from. You see why this aesthetic is valued by these men, right? And let's take it all the way back down to the foundation. You know what else it's connected to? Take a look at Miss Crawford from 1944. That smug, hard attitude. That is a drag queen aesthetic. It's a cluster B narcissistic Hollywood star aesthetic. It's a very female version of it. That's where it comes from. That's what this is about. Okay, time for a break. See you on the other side.
For more conversation on the dark and disordered psychology that shapes today's cultural and political left, subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Google Podcasts, and virtually anywhere else you get your podcasts. Let's learn to recognize these dynamics and call them what they are. Subscribe to Disaffected to learn how to break the spell.
We now have a bonus for our supporters. You can help the Disaffected podcast grow and receive invitations for our off-air Zoom hangouts by becoming a supporting member on Patreon or SubscribeStar. Patreon users, go to patreon.com/disaffected. SubscribeStar users, you can find us at subscribestar.com/disaffected. Check out our webpage at disaffected.fm for the complete list of ways you can help support us, and thank you.
Welcome back. If you like the show, you should subscribe to us on audio as well. Take us along for the ride in the car, take us to the gym, wash dishes with us. I sometimes listen to myself while I steam mop the floors because I'm crazy. We're everywhere you can get audio podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, Google Podcasts. We've just got a couple so far, but the thing is, we've got some audio that is audio only, so you need to subscribe on audio as well to get content that you're not going to see here on YouTube or any of the video channels. So check us out there, and thank you. Actually, maybe I should make this a little bit of bonus audio for a Christmas present or something. I want to tell you what my morning was like in the shower. Don't worry, I'm not going to get blue. So And actually, this is a lesson in how to diagnose homosexuality. So I'm going to give you one of the signs of homosexuality. One of them is that when a man is in the shower, sometimes Tina Turner just pops out of his mouth. So this morning, I'm washing my hair, and all of a sudden, I feel the urge to sing out, I'm your private dancer. I dance for money. I'll do what you want me to do. Tina Turner. If it weren't Tina Turner, it would be Cher. But this morning it was Tina Turner. And as soon as I got done singing Tina Turner, I thought to myself, wouldn't this be even funnier if this song about a retiring prostitute was about a retiring prostitute who was Tina Turner, but who was also an old Russian lady in a babushka? And she would say, do you want to see me do shimmy again? That is how you diagnose homosexuality. You're welcome. Know the signs. So, now it's COVID time. Stop. COVID time. Do. All right. People are still crazy, and they're getting crazier every day. And of course, one of the craziest parts of the country is Oregon. So take a look at what journalist Genevieve Rome had to say. Indoor masking in Oregon, it's likely here to stay. Today, OHA Oregon, that's the Oregon Health Authority, appropriately named, worked with stakeholders like those in the restaurant industry, business associations, etc., to discuss making the current indoor mask mandate permanent. Did they, Genevieve? They must really care about safety. Why? Why are we doing this? Why do I ask why? You know why. This is about control. We're almost 2 years into this. My state of Vermont has just passed a state law allowing cities and towns to set their own mask mandates, and they're doing it in droves. Almost 2 years into this, after the rollout of the vaccines. Oregon now wants to make indoor masking permanent. Why? Because the people in charge are doing it for narcissistic reasons. Some of them are doing it because they are quite literally psychopaths who get off on controlling other people. And a whole bunch of the normal people who are supporting this are in a codependent, abusive relationship with their government. As daddy and mommy at the state house spank them, mask them, strap them down, make them show papers, they keep lying to themselves the way I lied to myself for years that my mother actually cared about her children or her family. Oh, they wouldn't do it unless they cared. They wouldn't do it unless they really loved us. Wake up. And the bloodlust against the unclean and the vermin, known as the unvaccinated, continues apace. And people with large public platforms have absolutely no problem saying things like this, as British journalist Neil McKay said on Twitter. Anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers are prolonging COVID. It's they who are wrecking the economy. They who are infringing our liberty by keeping COVID going. Time to make their lives difficult. No mask, no vaccine, then no entry anywhere. Either stay at home or be a responsible citizen. This is, of course, a narcissistic reversal. This is blaming the victims of these insane policies for the sins of the policymakers. This is taking an act of nature, which is what a virus is, and blaming it on the dirty, bad people who aren't performing the religious rituals. This is the gods punishing us for being sinners. It's not that it's raining. It's not that the crops were destroyed by hail because weather does that. It's not that the town was buried by a volcano because volcanoes sometimes erupt. It's because you didn't throw enough virgins into the volcano. You didn't genuflect. You didn't bring enough of your harvest. You didn't perform the ritual or wear the magic mask. It's the same as domestic abuse. The people who won't obey me are doing harm. I wouldn't have to hit this bitch if she had my dinner on the table when I got home the way I told her to. And it's also like the way children, siblings in a narcissistic family punish each other to avoid the slap from mommy or daddy. If you just wouldn't do that, she wouldn't do this to us. Yeah. Meanwhile, let's move to the other coast. Here we are in Vermont. I do not know who this Twitter user is, but he or she has put together a very helpful chart, which you'll see on your screen here. It's a chart of cases in Vermont plotted against Anthony Fauci's declarations of what we should expect. So you'll see on the chart, the cases go up and down, and then on June 3rd? Anthony Fauci told CNN, with 50% of adults vaccinated, I feel fairly certain you're not going to see the kinds of surges we've seen in the past. And then what do we see in Vermont? But a huge spike about a month after that. Vermont is the most vaccinated nation in the United States by percentage. State, I'm sorry, I meant state. And I have a couple of questions about this. So this chart shows that these cases sort of going through the roof. I'm not even sure if I believe that. Because remember, they're using PCR tests to, quote, diagnose COVID, and these PCR tests can't discriminate between different kinds of coronaviruses. Sometimes they can't discriminate between a coronavirus and an influenza virus. They were not meant. This technology is not a diagnostic technology. It's just a technology that shows if you have any pieces of DNA in your system that indicates potentially the presence or exposure to something. It doesn't mean you have an active infection. It doesn't mean you've ever been sick. It doesn't mean you're sick now. It doesn't mean that you are shedding virus now. It doesn't mean any of those things. So I don't know if I even believe this shockingly high number of cases. Let's move down to New York City with outgoing Mayor Bill de Blasio going full Mussolini. Tweet from the morning news show Morning Joe Scarborough. New York City Mayor discusses new COVID expansions in the city. Vaccine mandate for all private sector workers. Vaccine proof for indoor dining, fitness, and entertainment required for children ages 5 to 11. No restaurants for children. No movies for children 5 to 11 unless they're vaccinated. With an experimental vaccine that has not been put through proper trials, we have not had long enough to collect the data, and now we are shoving it into the arms of children as young as 5 who do not die from COVID and are naturally immune in all but the tiniest proportion of cases. Why are we doing this? I know why they're doing it. If on the off chance that anyone is watching this show for the first time who tends to disagree with me, why are you putting up with this? Here's a question you can ask your friends. Why are you putting up with this? Do you know? And don't think it's going to get any better. Here's Mayor-elect Eric Adams, who's going to take office soon. He was bombarded, I think quite rightly, with questions from the public about whether he was going to back the fuck off from de Blasio's insane power grab. No, he isn't. Here's what he had to say. The science is clear. Vaccinations are our way out of this pandemic. Anyone who believes we're going to be operating under a new playbook under my administration is mistaken. Get vaccinated and get boosted. Eric Adams, get fucked and go fuck yourself. I am so sick of hearing orders out of public servants. And that is what you are, sir. You are a public servant, not a master. You serve the people. You do not issue orders. God, I used to think this was a country where no politician would dare to speak to people like this. This is part of what made us break away from the British crown. We don't have a monarchy in this country. I'm telling you, people in New York City, if you don't save yourself and if you don't do it soon, nobody's going to do it for you. You have to say no. Put this man in his place. Put them all in their place. Fire them all. Now we'll jump even further to the east and look at the UK. This is from the London Evening Standard. It's about post-pandemic stress disorder. Up to 300,000 people in the UK are facing heart-related illnesses due to post-pandemic stress disorder, two London physicians have warned. The result could be a 4.5% increase in cardiovascular cases nationally because of the effects of PTSD, with those aged between 30 to 45 most at risk, they claim. Oh, interesting. It's post-pandemic stress syndrome. It's not the vaccine. The vaccine isn't playing any part in this rise in heart attacks among 30 to 45-year-olds, and mostly men. No part at all. Post-pandemic stress disorder. This doesn't exist. There is no such disorder. It's not in any diagnostic manual. It's not in the DSM. Well, I guess they wouldn't want it to be in the DSM because who even knows how they would try to justify this. Let me give you a couple of quotes from the article. Mark Rayner, a former NHS psychological therapist and founder of some company, said that as many as 3 million people in Britain are already suffering from PTSD, thanks to stress and anxiety caused by the effects of COVID-19. No, sir, not caused by COVID-19, caused by the government. People are experiencing stress and anxiety, not from the virus, from our government. He fears this could result in a dramatic rise in physical health issues such as coronary heart failure. Coronary heart failure? That's saying heart failure. If cases are not detected or treated early, Mr. Rayner said PTSD is a very real problem on a massive scale, as well as the condition itself with all of its immediate problems. One of the biggest collateral issues is the effect it can have on heart health. Meanwhile, Tahir Hussain, a senior vascular surgeon at North Park Hospital in Harrow, said he's seen a significant rise in cases where he works. Cases of PTSD, which does not exist. He said, quote, "I've seen a big increase in thrombotic-related vascular conditions in my practice. Far younger patients are being admitted and requiring surgical and medical intervention than prior to the pandemic. I believe many of these cases are a direct result of the increased stress and anxiety levels caused from the effects of PTSD." I actually have some mixed feelings about this. And I don't know what ended up on the editor's cutting room floor. Perhaps both of these men acknowledged that there was something else going on, that it wasn't all their newly coined PTSD. That may be the case. If that's the case, good. But it's not evident from this article. It is true that chronic stress and anxiety do contribute to heart disease. It's happened to me. But a lot of things contributed to my heart disease that caused me to have a heart attack at 36. Yes, lifelong, probably elevated levels of the stress hormone cortisol, but also indirectly from stress and addiction-related choices that I made. Smoking cigarettes, alcoholism, overeating, especially overeating sugar and carbohydrates. I was quite fat. I was a 2-pack-a-day smoker, and I was a daily alcoholic. How do you tease out these effects, right? They're all stress-related. They're all really leftover consequences of a profoundly distorted childhood. So it is true that these things contribute to heart disease. But there seems to be enough evidence to investigate seriously the question of what these vaccines may be doing to people's hearts and circulatory systems. I don't know. the extent to which it's happening, because we're not allowed to investigate it. Every bit of news that comes out about this from practicing heart specialists gets quashed or called a conspiracy theory. And now we're going to make up a new disease, a new psychiatric disease, post-pandemic stress disorder. This just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm starting to get a little shrill here. Sorry about that. Here's why I'm getting shrill. There's still a big disconnect between people who are more like me, who the general public tends to call cynical, pessimistic, or more insultingly, histrionic, hyperbolic, serial exaggerators. There's a difference between people like me and a lot of other people out there who are disturbed by where we are, but who do not want to face the full reality of where we are. And I noticed this. I saw, this is not a criticism. The person I'm going to be referring to, I'm not going to use your name. You probably know who you are. I like you. This is not a personal criticism. You'll remember that we discussed this back and forth a little bit. This is not a gotcha at you. I'm just using our conversation as an example. I saw a friend on Twitter who objected to somebody else, and the somebody else had made a statement that he had learned in the past few years who his enemies were that he did not recognize as enemies before, and now he's on guard. And my friend commented on this and said, and I'm paraphrasing here, I'm trying to be accurate, but it is a paraphrase. I think he said something like, I have questions when I see somebody slotting people into the category enemies. And I see that sentiment from a lot of people. It seems to them that that's the morally dangerous move, is to say somebody is an enemy rather than someone that you just disagree with. And it is true that people often, especially today, and I've done this myself, I'm sure that I am still doing it to some degree, but I'm really confident that I do it a lot less than I did 5 or 6 years ago. But we all do this to some degree. We treat people as enemies when they may only be opponents, like opponents in a game of cards or in a political debate. We may be opposed on ideas, but we're not enemies at core. However, there are enemies, and it is not suspect to treat enemies as enemies. It is not suspect to say that, yes, some people are enemies and not merely opponents. This is war. We are at war. It's cold and it's cultural. It's not a hot war. But this is a war. We are at war. We are past disagreeing. We are in a very serious philosophical and cultural war. We can't hash out our disagreements anymore. The woke and the silent and supportive mainstream left who don't rein them in or check them, they are cooperating to destroy the foundations of our shared culture. How are they doing this? Short list. Critical race theory, the idea that being born white is a form of original sin, is being taught in public schools across this country. It's not just a few. It's not just that one academy in Boston you heard about. I've had multiple examples on the show, and I am not even one of the warriors who's actually in the thick of it like Chris Rufo is. He knows a lot more about this than I do. These schools are splitting up students and faculty into what they call affinity groups. You know what those are? Those are whites-only clubs and black-only clubs. That's what they are. Just like I want you to stop saying that these are gender-inclusive bathrooms and tell the truth, which is that they are mixed sex. These are not affinity groups. Don't use their terms. They're color and race segregated clubs. Pornography, child pornography, is being put in books that are available to high school students. You've seen us talk about it on the show. We are still going after the story of the genderqueer book, at Essex High School. It's around the country, and it's not the only book like that. And the glorification of mental illness, body disassociation, sequelae from trauma that these books celebrate, this is on the curriculum. The San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus brazenly jokes and makes a whole musical song about how the gays and the queers are coming after your kids. And they in fact are, and it's not a joke, but they hide behind saying it's a joke. And a lot of people just believe them. Kellogg's cereal is printing cereal boxes in rainbow colors with a side panel for the little tykes to write out their bespoke pronouns. Kellogg's cereal, can you think of anything more breakfast table American? Girls and women are having their bathrooms, their locker rooms, their rape shelters, their domestic abuse shelters taken over by men. A memorial service for 14 women killed by misogynists in Quebec is now going to be addressed by a trans woman, a man in Disney villainess makeup who's going to tell a story about how some dude groped his ass in a bar. The presidential administration is vastly overstepping its bounds, shredding the Constitution, trying to impose medical coercion on citizens and private businesses in a way that has never been done in this country and that's flatly unconstitutional. Governors across the country have illegally kept their state in suspended animation, in a state of emergency that never ends except on the governor's say-so. That's what's going on here. This is not... It's not a disagreement. It's not a quaint town meeting day in a state like Vermont where people get together and even disagree vociferously but end up shaking hands over hot cocoa afterwards. It's not an academic salon either. May the best idea win. We are past that. This is not a discussion. It is not a negotiation. This is a cultural movement that is shredding Enlightenment values and making a mockery of the United States Constitution. This is war. Arm yourself and govern yourself accordingly. I'll see you next week.
For more conversation on the dark and disordered psychology that shapes today's cultural and political left, subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Google Podcasts, and virtually anywhere else you get your podcasts. Let's learn to recognize these dynamics and call them what they are. Subscribe to Disaffected to learn how to break the spell.